The Discourse starts right now with Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis.
Welcome back to The Discourse. Well, the Alberta legislature is on a constituency break, but we've got so much to cover as Trump's tariffs are now official. We are taping this podcast on Liberation Day, and federal parties are now crisscrossing the country trying to earn your vote, no doubt talking a lot about this issue.
Yeah, so as Cheryl mentioned, we're filming this Wednesday afternoon after the Prime Minister is addressed, so into the evening. So we're trying to get as much that won't be, changed by tomorrow morning, but who knows, as Trump has seen to do many of that. He refers today as Liberation Day, which I don't think is going to age well, but we know now that it's unveiled the most expansive tariffs to date. And so what that looks like across the globe is 10% tariffs on all trading partners, as well as reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries who the U.S. feels are getting treated unfairly by. And that includes 20% on imports from the EU, on all those countries, 24% on goods from Japan. India will face 26%, and coming in at the top, China will have 34%. So that is that plus the 10% blanket or baseline tariffs that are coming in as reciprocal. So Canada, Mexico weren't mentioned when he did his press conference earlier this afternoon and the announcement. But does that mean we're not going to be on the list? Did we, get a carve out? There is comments saying that USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement, or CUSMA, if you want to rearrange the letters to put Canada first, which was a Trump-made agreement to replace NAFTA, that's what's protecting us. Is this forever? By the time this podcast airs, do we have different tariffs in place? Lord only knows. So either way, what we're looking at is the word uncertainty. And that means likely jobs losses. We're anticipating that looming. We will talk about what the Prime Minister said earlier. And we're hearing, from Prime Minister Carney talking about his conversation with Trump earlier this week or last is the beginning of negotiations. Who knows if this is that start line and we're headed into massive negotiations with the United States. And from Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative Party of Canada leader and the official opposition leader, renegotiations after the election as he has put in kind of what will he do going forward. So Cheryl, we're all both playing catch up, watching everything that's happening. What do you think this means?
Honestly, great question. I think you could ask 10 people what this means and you would get 12 opinions on what this means. So we know, yes, it might feel like a little bit of a sigh of relief for some Canadian sectors that were worried about blanket 25% tariffs across our economy. So a little bit of a win there. Canada is not affected by that, but we still do have steel and aluminum tariffs in place. Auto tariffs are now coming in at midnight, which will be crippling for both Canada's auto sector and the US auto sector. And anything that's not compliant with CUSMA will now face tariffs. So we know this will have implications across Canada. We know this will have huge economic implications, huge implications for job losses and long-term prosperity for Alberta families. And so again, hijacking the election, leaders are forced to respond to this. And we saw both leaders today, Pierre Poilievre proactively and Mark Carney in what will be the beginning of the government's response to this shortly after Donald Trump's announcement. So this is all Canada's talking about today, and rightly so.
Yeah. So between now and when you probably listen to this podcast, the cabinet will have met, the federal cabinet, tomorrow or Thursday. So when you're listening to this right now, very confusing to try and explain that or figure out what day I'm living in. The premiers and the federal government are meeting to kind of construct our official response. Carney did come out and he talked about, he used a lot of forceful words. And actually interesting, I was listening to Vashi Kapela's show, and the former U.S. ambassador to Canada was talking about reciprocal versus retaliation. And he actually cautions Canada to use terms like reciprocal as opposed to retaliation because it's less aggressive. And so it's interesting because Carney did come out saying, fight, we'll retaliate. This is going to change the global thing. As Canadians, we're going to be an acting force to make sure we protect workers. So it's going to be interesting to see how the two leaders kind of quantify or express or the terminology used and how that's received by the US, because he does now use reciprocal. And I think it's hilarious because it is essentially the same, but this might be a play that we'll see in the communication by the premiers and the prime minister on what we do tomorrow.
And
today.
truthfully, like the ambassador, I'm sure, is giving good advice in terms of negotiating position. But what about political position as you make your case to Canadians? I'm sure Canadians like the sound of retaliatory tariffs, like fight back, stand up for Canada, be aggressive, be strong. So every leader has to weigh those pieces as they think about, not just for that word, but broadly for their positioning. And what I found interesting today, because Pierre Poilievre came out this morning and basically said, this is my response. Here's what I plan to do to stand up for Canada. You could take Mark Carney's plan and you could take Pierre Poilievre's plan and you could just give people the scripts and you would not be able to guess which leader said which. They are so similar. They are equally bland at this point. They are a lot of buzzwords and talking points, but for the most part, like plans are the same.
Yeah, I did like that. I think for Pierre Poilievre's perspective, he got out in front, was really proactive because he doesn't have the opportunity to stand there and be prime minister. That is an advantageous position. We saw it with Premier Smith in the wildfires. We saw it with Doug Ford in the recent Ontario election. I'm sure there's other natural disasters or situations that have come up, but those are the two top of mind for me where premiers have been able to step into that premier-esque role. And it does help. Not only are they the incumbents, but because they show their leadership, Mark Carney is definitely, I think, going to benefit from that. And so I do think it was strategic of Pierre Poilievre to come out, and he did announce the Keep Canadians Working Fund, that reassurance that there will be short-term relief. And I think it's just that he hasn't really maybe come out and addressed the tariffs as much. There is, I think, a lot of things that I think he needed to say too, like we will not be the 51st state, even though we knew that, but he needs to come out, I think, and maybe defend some of the potential separatists that are in the conservative movement. And then again, some of the other measures that maybe he hasn't fleshed out as much as we've seen from the prime minister. So I'm interested to see what happens with the premiers. I'm sure I saw Doug Ford and he was just like, well, shit, like, mine still is hurting.
Impression?
He looks like he's really like this is taking a toll on him. And I mean that in the nicest way because that does it to every politician, but he did not look thrilled, nor would I. But I think this is really, really going to impact Ontario more than any other jurisdiction immediately. And I think the job numbers are close to 1 million of immediate impact. But we will, as we learned from Bianca Parsons from Alberta Food Producers and Jason Cripps from Alberta Forest Producers, that are products that like all industries will be impacted. Our entire economy, our global economy. This ambassador was also talking about a global recession. So much that you and I don't know or anyone doesn't know. This could all be totally different tomorrow. But like last time, it seems like Canada got a win today.
Well, I don't know if I'd call it a win. Like it's still.
But you did earlier.
No, I didn't. I still think it's a net loss.
Oh, totally. I think it is a net loss for the entire nation or the entire country,
it's like,
world.
It wasn't quite as terrible as it could have been. Like that's not a win. That's like just less of a loss, I guess.
Yeah, we lost less. Woo.
Yeah, there's back to Pierre Poilievre. Interesting because like thinking about what it would be like to be inside that campaign right now, that sucks. Like he knows when the news comes out, and we all knew the news was going to come out this afternoon, that the White House was going to stand up and announce this. There's no way for him to get into that media cycle. And in moments like this, earned media, traditional media still really matter. Like people were watching the news feeds today to find out in real time what the effect on Canada's industries would be. And for a party that has so well used social media and really like moved to new and emerging medias to really connect with people where they are, this is where they're not as strong and they're completely disadvantaged because he's sitting in opposition, but they knew they were going to get trampled on today. They knew there would be no way into the media cycle for him because people care about Donald Trump. They care about Canada's response, which Mark Carney gets to deliver. And then they care about the analysis. Like there's not a lot of room for Pierre Poilievre there. So I do think it was smart. Like the best they're going to do
getting
today,
into the early news cycle and having it reported on today.
Yeah, the best they're going to do today is now, because he did an announcement this morning, he gets to be a footnote in all of this, the coverage of Mark Carney.
Yeah, and during an election, they'll have to mention, but they'll talk about it. Then they'll talk about it because Mark Carney, when he's acting as prime minister, can't really be campaigning like, a renewed Liberal Party will do this. Yeah. He has to be very clear on dividing, his church and state during this election. So he does get coverage, but reporters do need to then also highlight Pierre's plan. Now, again, there's been a lot of who said this? Like the Liberals or the Conservatives during a lot of these policy plans. I think in the last week, Pierre has come out with a lot more tax relief, money back in the pockets of Canadians. But like you said, he could have I think he's doing the right things to talk about what is strong for conservatives and some of maybe the swing voters, but it is difficult to get airwaves when you're not the prime minister.
And it's interesting because we've heard this criticism of the Conservatives campaign now. We've heard it from people who are close to the party. We've heard it from people who know the Conservatives well. We've heard it from would-be allies saying that they're messing it up. They're like totally
Can
blowing
I just
this
jump in
election.
and say like
They
how
need to
fucking
pivot.
ridiculous that is? Like
Yeah,
I
go
might
ahead.
think that the campaign strategy. So what we're talking about is two conservatives, like Polster and Corey tonight, who's ran like Nick Kuvalis, both in an article last week or over the weekend, basically shitting on the campaign. And to me, I'm like two things. I'm like, one, neither of you got a job on this campaign. Is that part of it? So I'm also like, is there a bias you're bringing of being critical because you're not a seat at the table? And they're also very much talking about Ontario and talking about PCs and like, you need to mimic what we did for Doug Ford. I don't think that strategy applies for a whole Canadian-wide tactic. Half the time, I think the Ontario PCs are liberals. So like, for me, it was a very interesting thing just because it hurts our base. I can disagree with some of the tactics. I haven't thought that they've nailed it every single time on how they've gone about this. However, I'm not going to sit there and be like, here's what's wrong. Here's this person starting rumors. Like, it doesn't help. I've talked to lots of people in the war room and like, that's not their sentiment. And there are people that are not going to bullshit me. So it's just like, what were they trying to achieve by doing this article and shitting on the campaign strategy besides maybe getting a one-day news cycle?
And maybe
cool.
I mean, it's possible that they believe what they're saying, but I've done a bunch of panels this week, so I've been thinking about like, what do I think from the campaigns that I've worked on or the campaign that I ran? And I'm not a conservative. I haven't been inside the conservative infrastructure, but even just looking at the bare poll numbers, because the criticism is right now that the conservatives should stop talking about the things that they've been talking about for the last 2 years and pivot instead to talking about Donald Trump and talking about positioning Canada to take on the US, because that is where Canadians are at right now. And that's what people care about. And I think the latter part is true. I do think that is currently the ballot box question. I do think that is currently people's number one motivation. But if you look at the polling right now across the country, people do not believe Pierre Poilievre is best to do this job. They believe Mark Carney's best to do this job. They, a slight margin, believe Pierre Poilievre can take on affordability. And that's where he's really, really strong. And so, maybe like Axe the Tax, has lost its mojo. But he has this really committed, strong, like base of people who are more likely to turn out because these are things they care about the most. And so is it a winning strategy at this point when the landscape has changed so dramatically? Maybe not, but I don't think moving into what is now liberal positioning would necessarily see their numbers moving.
And like I said, I don't necessarily disagree with what their criticism was on pivoting. We've talked about his need. Now, David Coletto also came out, I believe it was David Coletto, I could be wrong, but came out, a renowned pollster of sorts, came out and said, basically, like, they don't need to pivot, changing the narrative. I do think for the Conservatives, like, you can still tie it back to the economy. And I think that's what Pierre Poilievre did and was successful in today, was like, even ambassadors, expert economists that were on media today were talking about the biggest thing that we can do to address tariffs, short and long, is our domestic efforts. And I think this is where Poilievre and the Conservatives have some wiggle room because, removing an emissions cap, removing C69, removing the industry carbon tax, because they both did the consumer. There's things that you can do, reliefs for industries and stuff that will be hurt by tariffs, and really focus on that provincial trade. They removed the tax on wine and beer and all of this so that products and producers can flow through and manufacturers flow through the country a lot faster. That, I think, is where the Conservatives have the opportunity to really talk about how are we going to deal with these tariffs. He talks about a renegotiation. So whatever deal the Liberals get when he's prime minister, he'd go back to the table. If that's possible or not, who knows what timeline we're working with, if like T's are crossed and I's are dotted with Trump. But I think he's taking the right position to not get away from his base and try and pivot and be like, I am an expert in international negotiations, because I think that's inauthentic. But I think he's hit the right tone of how it's going to impact Canadians and what we're doing to mitigate that by becoming the powerhouse internally as Canada. And I think that was the biggest thing that this whole experience showed us as Canada, that we don't actually like trade and export import well together. So how do we prevent tariff impacts? And I think they're
But that's
actually
not-
doing a good job of quote unquote pivoting, but not pulling a 180.
But that's not, I mean, the problem is that they don't have a unique offer to make. So, yeah, Pierre has an answer to the question, like, how are you going to deal with Donald Trump and tariffs? But it's
Yeah.
not unique. Like, no one's going to say, like, well, Pierre, I mean, maybe someone will say, but most people are not going to say, well, no, Pierre Poilievre's plan is dramatically different and it's going to seriously impact my life if I vote for him. Because it's like, for the most part, it's the low-hanging fruit. It's the easy stuff. Most of it, Mark Carney has already said.
But Mark Carney isn't doing so. I think one of the criticisms, and I'm very excited for the debate because I think this will be able to flesh it out to maybe people that aren't in the weeds as much as we are. It's not removing C69 is huge. That is a huge symbol that he's promising to build our energy sector, to get, our natural resources to market. That is a huge impact on no new pipelines. There's also, the industry carbon tax, which may not be a TSN turning point in the campaign, but that does also signal he's not a friend to the energy sector. And then the last piece is that he hasn't said that he's going to lift the emission cap. So he might say, I'm building pipelines, but then he's going to have a cap on how much he can get to the market. So it's really not letting us be independent as the energy powerhouse that we can be. So I think these are things, how does the campaign translate that to the layman's terms and to the voter outside of Alberta?
Exactly.
A little
Outside of
harder than
Alberta.
what I'm saying.
I think,
But I think
sure.
energy products saying he's an overpromiser, underdeliverer would be the way I'd go.
I'm just going to say a couple words before you say your next sentence, okay?
No, my voice is better now. So I'm like, guys, I don't sound like a haggard smoker.
I think, yes, absolutely. Those points, C69, really going to resonate with people who are connected to energy in Alberta. And there are a lot of people in Alberta connected to energy. That could be, like, for some people, a vote determining issue. Pierre Poilievre has taken a stance on 3 things Alberta industry really cares about. That doesn't fundamentally change anything. Like, for the most part, those people were likely already voting Conservative.
I think that it might actually help with what we've seen on even Quebec and Ontario. Like, they want to come back to the table. Quebec just did a similar fair deal panel like Alberta did, and actually wants to take power away from the federal government, put taxes back in Quebec to redistribute. They came up with a whole different plan that actually is very Alberta-esque. So I don't think it's just Alberta. I think that there is the energy sector and the money that can be supporting in job creation of these pipelines that can put a lot of people to work. That I think you're underestimating that it's not just an Alberta-centric. The other thing is I think it really shows that he's like, I'm going to do this, but then like has 17 barriers that he's not willing to take down to make that a reality. And I think that just speaks to his character. I don't know if there's enough time in this election cycle to meet 100% the real Mark Carney, but I think the debate is going to be the best chance for Pierre to push back on that.
So he has done one thing, which is take the carbon tax off the table. As of earlier this week, the carbon tax has been moved to zero. Seriously, I cannot speak. I am not allowed to talk on this podcast.
Zip.
The carbon tax has been taken down to zero. But Conservatives would say that's not far enough because the legislation has not yet been repealed. Is that how you feel as well?
I know that you're talking about what Larissa said on Power and Politics yesterday because I watched you guys. I think that it's a big criticism that I think I will stick to the audience. I don't think it's going to expand beyond the people that need that validation that he's not being conservative enough to vote for him. I think it is a relief to the average voter. So I think it takes that off the table. I don't think I think it's with that C69, with that emissions cap, like the narrative that he still, like Justin Trudeau, hates the energy sector and doesn't want our natural resources to get to market, hates Western Canada, is something that's showing to be true every time he talks. I think
you've been very marinated in conservative views of this. Do you think broadly right now
I'm
Canadians
saying the industrial consumer tax, like removing that carbon tax, very much speaks and motivates a conservative voter. I don't think it flips a liberal voter.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's possible that
I have been marinated though.
That are marinated in this language, like view Mark Carney now and say, like, because Pierre Poilievre is dedicated to this, he said he'll do those things. Mark Carney won't say he'll do those things. He's anti-energy. But generally speaking, I do not get the impression that Canadians as a whole think of Mark Carney as anti-energy.
I think with all those things, I'm talking about the industrial carbon tax as a standalone. I don't think so. I would paint that picture if I was in the war room to a very specific industry. I wouldn't broadly say it all the time, but I think that's like a more concentrated message that could get out or be strong.
Okay, so
but I'm not going to shit on the war room because I'm not My lovely counterparts. Ugh, makes me mad.
Okay, so let's talk about just a little bit about the campaigns this week
Mhm.
because both campaigns had to lose candidates this week. I don't know if we should call it they got rid of them, the candidates resigned, et cetera, all sort of irrelevant details. But the Conservatives
Say that.
had no, but like, does it matter to you that the Liberal candidate resigned himself rather than being kicked out?
Well, I think when the prime minister and the guy says they stand behind him and that it's a teaching lesson, I think that does impact the leadership
For sure.
of the candidate. So to the average person, no, maybe not. I think in that riding, knowing that the candidate resigned, mainly because of the speculation of RCMP investigation, and like that was just going to ruin his campaign. I think he didn't have a choice. I don't know if the RCMP stuff was coming forward on this individual, if he would have resigned, because it didn't seem like he was going to be kicked out by his leader. Like he had Mark Carney stand beside someone that said that they were going to put a bounty on their counterpart candidate, ultimately sending him to a communist country, which ultimately means you're going to be killed. So, I mean, look at it from if Danielle Smith didn't fire Jennifer Johnson and have her.
Didn't.
Well, she did. Like, let's be honest. The caucus did. We told, like, and they said it. They said, like,
She's
she went
currently
into
in the
caucus,
caucus.
and caucus, she wasn't, though, during the election.
But she is.
Okay, well, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about back then. But during the election, but what I'm talking about is like in the election period, if she wouldn't have gone to caucus and had the caucus members say like, you're fucking out, I think that would have definitely hurt the campaign. I didn't think it at the time because I know what she said wasn't what was construed. She didn't call trans kids poop in a cookie, but that's how it played out. And so the reality is you had to deal with it at face value. This is even worse. I don't want to say shitting on people because that would be a pun that's not appropriate. That's discrimination against base. This is about killing someone. Like our leader, I think it's disgusting. Actually, again, I've said Mark Carney just needs to talk, and not about tariffs and in the prime minister setting, but like talk as a human and what he would do as like the leader of the Liberal Party. Because the fact that he thinks that's okay is not okay with me. Like, so I think it's disgusting. I'm just going to
play devil's advocate for a second, not because I necessarily sit on the side saying this is okay, but just from the other side of this.
To make the podcast good.
Yeah. So obviously what he said is not acceptable. Obviously what he said, he should have never said, and there should be consequences for it. But I do appreciate that when making a decision, like it's easy. It is so easy for a political leader to say, hey, you're messing up my game. You distracted the campaign for a day. You're out. That also sets a crazy precedent for what you are expected to do with the rest of your caucus should anyone misstep. And I think like for a leader to take the time to say, let's look at what you said, let's look at the context that you said it in, and then let's look at your decades-long career and decide like whether this is out of line with what you have demonstrated over years and years of your commitment to certain causes, and say, does this discount or does this eclipse everything that you've ever done? And in this case, Mark Carney decided it does not. I'm going to keep you. Now, unfortunately for Mark Carney, the candidate resigned the next day. So he took a political hit to keep that candidate, and all that political like capital is wasted because the candidate's gone the next day anyway. So then he gets this criticism like you're talking about. But if we are talking about devil's advocate side, the Liberal campaign has said like, this was a joke. It was on Chinese language media. It was a joke. It was, he shouldn't have said it, but it was never intended to be serious. I mean, I still think it's rather serious, but if we're looking at it from the conservative side where you have like loathed cancel culture and now you're like moral hall monitor, it does seem a bit duplicitous.
Yeah, but I do think cancel culture versus basically calling for someone to be executed, like that is the interpretation. And I just think it crossed a line. I don't care if he drained political capital. If you were in that war room, and even if you knew the context, like I said, if you listened to the whole thing on Jennifer Johnson, not what she said, if she had a trans kid, would she be okay? I don't fucking think so. So if you're going to play, like, if that's the devil's advocate, it's just like, no, it was just fucking wrong. I know we would have both canned him because it's too much to say. And like, I think it's also how he did it. Like, this is a teachable moment. I think that was how he kind of like almost brushed under the rug, or just when he did it, he just deferred to his record. And I'm like, why should anyone be exempt because of something X, Y, and Z? They said something fucking stupid. They screwed up your campaign.
Aggressive.
completely inappropriate. Like, I mean, if you think about it, like they're literally calling for this person to be taken to a communist country and executed. Like, to me, that's not excusable.
I think too, like if I'm looking at it like sitting in the campaign director's chair, not only that, but like looking at the bigger picture of like even a bounty being placed on the head of a candidate running in a Canadian election, if in any way looking to be supportive of that is just not acceptable. You don't want the days of coverage of it. You don't want the analysis of it. You don't want people talking about it. Like, just get it over with. But I mean, Mark Carney's untested. This is the first time. He's never had to manage a caucus. He's not really had to manage a cabinet. Like, this is his first time ever dealing with this. And to do that under a spotlight, like, he chose wrong.
Yeah, he chose, and that's what I mean. Like, he chose wrong, and it really sucks. Good for the Conservatives, but like, it sucks that the candidate went and then just resigned. Like, you know, I assume that man, even though he had such a great career, as Carney says, will not have much of one after.
Can I hear your impression of Mark Carney again?
He's a little bit more like stoic than my Doug Ford.
Oh, wow. This is good.
Oh my gosh, I can't take those back. Well,
okay, let's pivot to another topic.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll just save you from yourself. Danielle Smith has embarked on what I will call the No F's tour.
You can say fucks.
Sure.
I say it all the time.
She's on the No Fucks tour. I'm going to have to mark this explicit content now.
You always do when I'm on, which is every time.
We saw this clip come out from Breitbart, which we played in the show last week, where she was calling on the U.S. to intervene in our election on behalf of Pierre Poilievre. Obviously, the Conservative campaign hated that. It was a lost day on the campaign trail for them. Pierre Poilievre had to stand at a microphone and answer for Danielle Smith. She canceled her appearances that day. She went super quiet. And I think for a lot of people, they were like, okay, Danielle Smith obviously wants Pierre Poilievre to win. She's going to stay out of his way. She's going to sit down. But she did not. She did not sit down. In fact, she stood up in the House, in the legislature, made a very passionate speech and said this lady will not be told to sit down, and then embarked on the beginning of her No F's tour, where she went to Florida and sat down with right-wing podcaster Ben Shapiro, and then came back to Canada and launched a announcement that she would be starting a What's Next panel, inviting crowdsourcing referendum questions, not specifically on separation, but like, you know, if you wanted to do that as a citizen-led project, she wants you to know you can. So this cannot be helpful to the Conservatives.
I don't know how you feel about this topic. Okay, first off, I'm going to work back like from what you started with.
Thank you for letting me get through all of that.
I just like twiddled my little.
Was it hard?
Here. No, it was so riveting. Well, I think you summarized it well. And one thing I will say that I'm sure my party doesn't love about me is you stay on message. That is like almost verbatim what you said on Power and Politics. Cheryl's on Mondays.
And Tuesdays.
And Tuesdays. Okay, so you can catch her
alternating weeks.
Alternating. Gotcha. Okay, so follow her on that. The clip is very similar to what you just talked about. Last week, we talked about her being in the House. So if you don't know what we're talking about, go back and watch last week's episode about her going. And is she going to go be on Ben Shapiro, which we both speculated she would. She did go down there. I will say, as I've always been skeptical, and I was skeptical, but I did reference it back when she was going to be on Jordan Peterson, and how when I was advising was like, I don't think we should do this. It's really risky. Let me tell you, like, I think it actually benefited. I won't say the Conservative Party of Canada or maybe Canada, but I do think it was a big thing for Alberta. I think it was a big thing for her and her administration, and indirectly Canada. I mean, Ben Shapiro basically went all weekend leading up to this on 20 million followers, second largest podcaster to Joe Rogan in the US, huge reach, obviously like listened to by a lot of influential people in the Republican Party, including Trump's administration, but basically came out and he did reference one that Americans do not, 68% of Americans are discontent with Trump talking and doing these tariffs rather than just focusing on their economy and some of the tax cuts that he's bringing in. So on the economy, he's doing well. They're really unhappy with that. He highlighted that. I think Ben Shapiro just hated Justin Trudeau because all of his negative things about Canada were on that. And from watching it, like Premier Smith did push back on him saying, we will never be the first 51st state. We will never do this. This is the benefit for you. And I think a lot of those sound bites did get picked up. So So if you're deeming this mission successful, I think that
I'm not.
it did help. Well, I am. For the premier for Alberta. And I do think that even for the United Conservative Party, like it's helping her poll numbers in Alberta. I think there's a lot of people that are super happy with her performance. We do have the animosity to Ottawa that we've always had. I think that really motivated that base. But I think there's just a broader population in Alberta that is just like really happy that she's standing up for our energy sector, as well as our agriculture and forestry. So as much as like I hate the timing and potentially if it would have gone bad, it would have really screwed over this Conservative Party of Canada. But I don't think this one hit as hard or at all compared to the Breitbart, which I think she had her tails between her legs a little bit on or following.
Yeah. Well, I don't think she expected that to come out when it did because it was taped March 8th, even before there was a Liberal leader. So I do actually, I will say I like the idea that Danielle Smith is like, you know what, you don't agree with me? Like, let's chat. Like, I love that approach to it, to say like, it's okay if they don't agree with us. Like, let's go talk to them. Let's not ignore them. Let's not like strike them from the list because they have different views than us. I do appreciate that approach. I don't think her closed door meeting with Ben Shapiro was impactful. Ben Shapiro hasn't said anything since that he hasn't previously said. So no new information is coming out from that. So cool. She got to influence a whole bunch of people in the room, a whole bunch of Republicans in the room. Like, does that have any impact on Donald Trump?
I don't know if
so
I agree.
Far, unlikely. Like very, very unlikely. He does whatever he wants and he doesn't care what anybody else thinks. And I know that there are conservatives today. I agree. There are a lot of people in Alberta that probably love watching this. And like I've said, she's an incredible retail politician. But for those watching the exemption that Canada got today and saying, thank goodness Danielle Smith did that Ben Shapiro trip. No, that's not true.
You know what? I don't agree that it hasn't been anything Ben Shapiro has said about Canada. I think he came out with some, what I know are very big Danielle Smith talking points and regurgitated when he did some posts, he did a podcast. Like, he's done a lot of his own social media, TikTok, etc., where he's talked about like the relationship with Alberta that I don't think he had those messages before. He didn't shit on Canada like he has before. I don't think he really got so much into the weeds on the Canada stuff from the social coverage I've seen. But he also did send the message to his supporters that Americans, and reiterated stats that even if it doesn't influence Trump, like, I get it. I don't think anyone is going to be the like puppet master of Trump. I do think the industries are even really trying to get through to say, don't do this. This is going to F us over. But I don't think it hurt the way that maybe it was criticized for. Was it the slam dunk? Who knows? But I will say, I bet you it's going to raise the UCP a hell of a lot of money, because it really does motivate a lot of Albertans that we have someone that relentlessly stands up for Alberta.
So I would like to just put on a tinfoil hat for a second.
Oh, love when you do that.
Does Danielle Smith want Pierre Poilievre to win the election?
Yeah.
I'm
just
not
held
convinced
up on
she
a
does.
social thing. It was like, axe the tax, something.
Axe what
it
tax?
was a sign.
Oh,
well, it
good.
was like
We're
a poster.
still using those signs. Good.
Yeah, well, I think they were already ordered, like Randy Boissonnault's. I got a mailer of Randy Boissonnault's yesterday.
Cute.
Like, re-elect him. And I was like, that didn't age well either.
But this is
Anyways.
like, as I watch her, like, I agree, stuff that she's doing, I'm sure plays well with a certain portion of Albertans. And it certainly leverages long-standing animosity that Alberta has to Ottawa and anybody else that doesn't respect or understand Alberta's economy and Alberta's industry. But it's really messing up, like, when she launches, does she need to launch a what's next panel right now that raises the specter of separation? Like, she does not need to do that. Does she need to crowdsource questions during the election about the result of the election? She does not. And I can't imagine that Pierre Poilievre's campaign is pumped about that. Like, I think they're probably checking out what she's saying every day, all day long, to see how is she messing us up today. And truthfully, just before I let you jump in here, I think we know that Danielle Smith has built a personality and earned a lot of points by fighting Ottawa. And if there continues to be Liberals in Ottawa, she gets to keep doing that, which maybe she doesn't get to do the big Canadian stuff she wants to do, but she certainly has a great villain in her political story.
I see what you did there. Is like, does she secretly want Carney so she can forever fight Ottawa? No.
Okay, I will take my hat off.
Just no. Shortest answer I've ever had. I also see what you did there with like, please let me finish. Usually like, I'll let you jump in when. And I was like, oh, okay. Sitting here waiting. And you're learning, Cheryl.
Or you are.
Maybe it's a relationship that's growing. But I think that was a misstep. Fair deal panel, like, again, I talked earlier about how Quebec had actually put kind of a similar fair deal panel on their relationship. I think that Quebec and Alberta should just talk and maybe bring Ontario in and do some more collaboration across our federation, as opposed to commissioning a panel. Like, one, that's not going to translate to anything anytime soon. Also, when would we hold said referendum? And how are we?
municipal.
What's this mechanism?
Doesn't she want to put it on municipal elections?
Well, she could, like, technically. I mean, and it wouldn't cost taxpayers to hold its own referendum. I just don't even know how you put that mechanism into place of, like, let's everyone enter what question and then we'll spin the wheel. Like, I don't think that this was well thought out. I think it was more reactionary to, well, if they want to do this, we'll do this. And I think it really put her in a corner, to what you said. If she didn't want to talk about separation or put that on the table, unfortunately, that is where a lot of people's minds went.
Totally.
So I think she'll have to walk it back or clarify,
be
because yeah, we'll see. I could be wrong, but I'm so sick of, like, bureaucracies and panels and committees and all this. I mean, I think the next move is to find your like-minded provinces that you can align with, and maybe look outside of, like, what is some concessions. And Quebec, actually, Premier was talking about this, actually has some interesting things that I think Alberta could nibble on, which I wouldn't have guessed from Quebec. But I think they're just looking at, how do we diversify our entire country, and how do we make the provinces take back power from Ottawa? If Pierre's there, I still think there's going to be some conversations. We haven't heard about pensions for a long time, so that one might be off the table, but that would be a head-to-head with the federal government. Equalization payments, like, I think it's not going to be sunshines and rainbows if Pierre becomes the prime minister, or when he becomes the prime minister, but it doesn't. So I don't think it's going to make every battle between Ottawa go away, but I think it will also give an opportunity to have more collaboration. I don't think she needs that villain going forward if Ottawa stays in their lane.
I guess we'll see. Well, let's leave it there.
So I don't get gross again.
Let's leave it there, since there's
No.
So
I have a question.
What?
This is kind of a random one.
Oh, great.
But yeah, well, kind of about it. So, because we haven't talked about the NDP, we don't hear about the NDP because, like, they're almost gone. Jagmeet Singh might actually lose his riding, it appears. What's your take on that? And then also, like, another little oopsie this week, and not that it was this week, but it kind of hit the ethics commissioner, was Wab Kinew, the premier of Manitoba, kind of got slapped on the hand by the ethics commissioner for not reporting going to Grey Cup on a private plane or a chartered plane with the Bombers. Does this make you feel any different about your criticisms of Danielle Smith, or what premiers are allowed and not allowed to go to?
But my criticism of Danielle Smith wasn't necessarily that she went in a box. My criticism has been that she changed the rules. She followed the rules. Like, she changed the rules so that she could do things like that, and it wasn't against the rules. My criticism was that you change the rules so dramatically, then the public has no idea what companies are doing to get special privileges or special access, or maybe nothing at all, but the perception remains there. And that's why those rules were put in place in the first place. So yeah, Wab Kinew should apologize, and he should follow the ethics rules. And I mean, his statement today is that he didn't realize that if he was paying out of pocket for things, which is the case here, that he had to disclose it. It's not that he took anything for free. It's that he paid for tickets himself on a chartered plane. So I think that's a little bit different. And basically he said, sorry, I didn't know I had to disclose it, and I'll disclose it in the future. Truthfully, I don't think that sticks to him.
Can I just say, though, like, I actually think on the access that people have, or, like, I mean, you're a premier, you work all the time. Private sector can go to these things, like, I think there is, and I don't know, I agree with, like, that threshold with the government of Alberta increasing and then leveraging, that opportunity immediately, that perception's there. But I'm also like, these guys work really hard. Like, they don't get paid very much for the shit that they have to deal with. Like, sometimes I'm just like, why don't we reevaluate even some of the rules that surround them? Like, disclosure, he paid out of his own pocket. Yes, not everyone can go on the Bombers, but I have, know people that have chartered planes. Like, is it really that big of a deal that they're doing that? It's all about the selling access and getting deals. And I recognize that's a very serious thing. But That's not always the case when they're going to games or going by a crown corp of your organization just to be there. Like, I think the premiers should be at the Grey Cup. I think the premiers should be at games.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like, it's a little muddy. So I'm actually not letting, I'm not shitting on Wob too hard because, he didn't know what he didn't know. I'm just wondering if it impacts your perspective on that. And if this hurts, it changes your impact on the Alberta government. And then also, like, does this hurt the NDP or does it matter? No, it doesn't.
No, I don't think.
Because
Honestly,
they're dead anyway,
Wob
or what?
Canoe paid for his own seats to a beloved sports game. Like, I don't think that hurts anybody anywhere.
Well, no, I'm just wondering because NDP is all about the working class. Like, you would think that a lot of their supporters would never even be able to fathom that. Like, is that hurting his image because he has the ability to pay $8,000 to do this? Or
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
I don't think so.
Just curious.
And then on the NDP federally, like, yeah, this is a tough election for the NDP federally. It's a tough starting point. Personally, I have been a part of the organization in many situations where everybody said, like, they're over, they're done, let's count them out. And the NDP almost every time proves everyone wrong and does better than people expected. And I don't think the NDP is going to form government in this election, but I do think they're going to do better than people expected. And that's for a couple of things. One is that they have a really targeted campaign. So they're going to spend the cap. And when you think about $30 million across the board, the Liberals and the Conservatives are spreading that everywhere. They have to. The NDP are targeting that to incumbents. So that means like a really targeted campaign to make sure that their incumbents hold their seats. The other thing is that the NDP isn't positioning themselves on the ballot box question. They're not saying we're best to take on Donald Trump or to position Canada to push back against tariffs. They're saying, remember the things that you care about most, like Medicare, like your new expanded dental care, like pharmacare, and remember who got us there. Because the reason that we have these in the first place is because the NDP pushed the government to do those things. And maybe we're not electing an NDP government in this election, but without an NDP voice, without NDP representatives in the House, who's pushing the government of the day to maintain and protect those public services? And I do think, especially in incumbent ridings, that will be really resonant.
So when you say super targeted, because I've also seen the NDP talk about like they're really putting all this effort into social media or a digital campaign. Do you mean, because like, I'm like, that kind of seems mixed. Are they just hyper targeting those ridings or what? And I know that, it was discussion earlier as I was watching the tariffs, like how does Jagmeet get into this conversation? He can really just talk about the working class and standing up for those workers is really the only narrative, right? Like it's hard for Pierre to break through. It's even harder for Jagmeet. So if you're talking about their incumbent seats and that's what they're focused on, is that their social strategy too? Or are they more
honestly, I don't know.
Doing that?
That's
all I've just seen is like, we're doing the digital campaign.
Their
we're doing
social
like
spend
less
is
ground.
Yeah, their social spend is super low compared to the other parties. So I'm just guessing, I don't know this, that I imagine that it's everything. I imagine that it's digital. I imagine that it's canvassers. I imagine that it's, whatever you can spend to shore up a riding. They're likely outspending their opponents in those.
Right. No, so Jagmeet though, polls are showing that he's like potentially losing. Do you think that when you say he can, like, they'll overperform or they'll, they'll do better than you expect them to, do you think that he holds his seat? And does that, if he loses, does that mean the whole party kind of collapse? Like, I don't think it's tied to his identity necessarily, but does that mean, is there like a up and comer, like someone that could step in?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's lots of people, and I mean, well,
tell me,
remains
Rachel
to be seen.
Didn't have any. I want to know.
Rachel Notley's coming back. Just kidding. She's gonna kill me for saying
Here
that.
first, ladies and gentlemen. Here first.
Just kidding.
She'll be on our show next week to talk about it. No, I'm kidding.
Sorry, Rachel.
Wish.
So, yeah, I mean, he could lose his seat. The NDP vote has largely collapsed in British Columbia at this point. When I say I think that they'll do better than expected, I mean, there's some polls that say the NDP is going to win like 3 seats. I think the NDP will do better than that. I think they will continue to be relevant. And I think it is a very resilient party that no matter what the election result, the party will rebuild. If Jagmeet Singh
have a
loses
strong
his
base,
seat,
like a forever NDP
and a
supporters.
really dedicated group of members and volunteers. Like if the NDP do poorly, people will come back to help it rebuild. And that will happen whether Jagmeet Singh has a seat. It will happen whether he's the leader. It will happen whether there's a new leader. That will happen no matter what.
Yeah. I think we see it a little bit on the left too, like that. I think it's different when you're a centrist party, but when you've always got your like strong base, true blue or true orange all the way through, and like they'll always be there to roll up sleeves. You guys just don't kick yours out as much as we
just
do.
never roll our sleeves down. Just always working away. Yeah.
So for the people, Cheryl, for the people. Anyways, that's now we can stop. Now we're done. So new episodes drop every Thursday, 5 a.m. So set those alarms and don't forget to follow us on X, Instagram, and our new favorite, TikTok.
And we will see
And the
you
comments there
next-
are amazing. Sorry, can I just say that the comments?
Can't
I just
finish.
You're the one that
closing.
always texts me like, check the comments. They're amazing.
love the
and then,
comments.
like, they're so good. Anyways.
Okay, like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Discourse is hosted by Cheryl Oates and Erica Barudis. Follow on Instagram @The Discourse Pod. Subscribe to The Discourse on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.